Shalom, WJC family. It's time for our weekly Torah talk. Last week, we actually didn't have a weekly Torah talk. I was in Israel, privileged to travel on an interfaith trip of rabbis and ministers and priests organized by the Westchester Jewish Council, sponsored by UJA Federation. An amazing trip. An interfaith trip is an amazing way to see the Holy Land. And I learned so much. And I want to put that in the context. I'm going to share today 3 vignettes and the lessons from them. And I want to open up with a passage from the Parsha Behukkotai. We read, Im Behukkotai telechu, if you will follow my decrees, God says, and observe my commandments and perform them, then I will, and it goes on to say, all the wonderful things that we will enjoy. Provide great grain, have rains in their time, wonderful vintages from your vineyards. But it goes on later in the chapter, but if you will not listen to me and perform my commandments, and then things go off the rails. Dozens of verses of curses. And although we try our hardest to be good, to follow God's word, to bring that holy presence into the world, sometimes we feel like we're living in the curses. This week, a couple weeks ago with Buffalo, and this week, the terrible massacre in Uvalde, the murders at the top supermarket, racially motivated in Buffalo. We feel sometimes like we're living in the curses. And I don't have answers for why this injustice seems to exist in the world. All we can do is hold on and have faith and hope that our cleaving to God, our clinging to God can keep us afloat. But in these 3 stories that I'm going to share with you from my trip to Israel, hopefully there's a little bit of succor, a little bit of solace, a little bit of support for the path ahead. The first incident I want to mention is going to Yad Vashem with rabbis and with Christian clergy, some who'd been and some who've never been before. And we stood outside. We left shortly after the murders at the Tops supermarket. Pastor Mark McLean led us in prayer outside of Yad Vashem for the fallen in Buffalo. And that focus on a recent incident of hate, not towards Jews, although we found that the perpetrator apparently was a terrible anti-Semite as well, but it changed a little bit the perspective in Yad Vashem. It changed it from the particularist and important particularist perspective and expanded us to see it in a more universal way about hate and racism and the ugliness of humanity at its worst. And walking into Yad Vashem, just like walking through Israel with this more open, broader perspective, it changed the way we saw it. Anyway, we went through the museum and we came out, and I was very upset, as I tend to be after going through Yad Vashem. It's traumatic. And Pastor Kevin Vinger, he came and he gave me a big hug, a new friend of mine. And I said, oh, thanks. I'm going to be all right. And he said, yeah, but I don't know if I am. And I asked him what had happened for him in there. And he told me that actually he was a descendant, a German by ethnicity. And that seeing all that was very hard for him. And to square that with his own history and the history of his family was very hard. And that he had a lot of reckoning to do, just even as I had a lot of reckoning to do. And it reminded me that, while we all might see the evils of the world with different eyes, we all see them. And actually bringing those different perspectives together, that's how we battle it. That's how we see new perspectives. And Kevin and I walked off arm in arm, supporting each other in trying to incorporate what we had just seen into our worldview, a view full of holiness that seemed to be absent. although Kevin made a beautiful drush, he wouldn't call it that, but a beautiful teaching about the righteous Gentiles and the example that they set. And that even as the worst of humanity was on display, so was the best, people putting themselves, their lives in danger to save strangers. And what kind of a mission does that leave for us at times like this? The second incident I'd like to share took place in an absorption center, a Ulpan Etzion, a place where they bring new olim, new immigrants to Israel. And in particular, at this absorption center in Jerusalem, there were Ukrainian families. And our host, Danielle, taught us about their journey, how the Jewish Agency and how Israel had worked hard to bring these folks in serious danger. We met with two families who had come as refugees. And their guide in all of this was a Russian Jew who had come earlier to Israel in a previous wave. But they could all speak Russian, and so that commonality of being Jewish, but also of being from Russia, Ukraine, Eastern Europe, that melting pot came together and created a different, a special place for these refugees. And while we were there, Father Kirill Engelov, another new friend of mine, who is a Ukrainian Catholic priest, was able to speak with these Ukrainians in Ukrainian, and rabbis attempted to speak to them. Mostly they spoke English, so we spoke to them in English, as did other of the ministers and priests who were with us, and it all came together for this. It was just all those perspectives, all those different nationalities and languages coming together in this sacred moment of welcome and hospitality. It was stunningly beautiful. And Danielle, because it was an ulpan, taught us a little Hebrew. She said, when someone welcomes you, they say, Bruchim habaim, blessed is the one who comes. And you're supposed to respond, she said, Bruchim hanimtzaim, we feel blessed, the ones who are found. And it was not lost on me in that moment that Bruchim hanimtzaim, the one who is found, being found is different than the one who arrived, or the ones who got here, the ones who reached their destination, the ones even who are being welcomed. When you are found, it means someone was looking for you. Something was calling you. And we all felt called in that moment. We all felt found in this act of love and hospitality, the core mitzvah, the core practice of Abraham and Sarah, all of our spiritual ancestors, and we were nimtza. We were found because we were together. And the diversity of our views, the diversity of our approaches, the different lenses through which we saw holiness in each other and in the Holy Land, that lifted us up, as it can lift us up now. The third vignette I want to share happened at the Yad B'Yad schools. Amazing schools in the Holy Land, not by political policy as much as by the reality of the people in Israel. The school system is divided up. Religious Jews go to one place, ultra-Orthodox Jews go to different kinds of places, yeshivas, and secular Jews go to another place, and Arabs go to other schools, and it's all divided up. And the people don't meet. They don't meet as kids. How do you integrate a society that's divided up in schools, even if it's the preference of some of those people who are divided? The Yad B'Yad schools say that doesn't work. We need to bring people together. And so they are bilingual schools. There are now 7 of them, I believe. They had their first graduating class, K through 12, in 2011. They've served thousands of students. And they do amazing work. The students, Arabs and Jews who otherwise would maybe first meet when the Jews were in an Israeli uniform and the Arabs were trying to make a living or doing whatever they were doing, and maybe the interaction would be like a policing action. That's no way to have first impressions or first contact. And so And so now they meet in schools, but not everybody loves this proposition. The schools are heavily criticized and even physically attacked by people on both sides, by hard right Jews who think that Arabs and Jews shouldn't be learning together, by Arabs who feel like the Arabs who go there are collaborators. And so there's constant attack. And my colleague, Rabbi David Shook from Bethel in New Rochelle, he asked a very sensitive question. He said, doesn't it feel so lonely doing what you're doing and knowing that there are people who want to hurt you because of that, people who will criticize you because of that? And our guide had such a beautiful answer. She said, yes, it can be lonely, but there's thousands of students here and hundreds of faculty and staff, and we're all in this together. And while we might be alone and isolated together, we are together. And in that togetherness, we are lifted up. And in hearing her, I couldn't help but look around at the colleagues I was with, the priests and the ministers and the rabbis who were Reform and conservative and Orthodox. And here we were trying to make our way in the Holy Land together, all from Westchester, but all from different places and different backgrounds. We were different in so many different genders, different races, ethnicities, nationalities. But in that moment, approaching the very complicated land of Israel, nation of Israel and land of Israel, listening to her say, as long as we're together, we're never alone. And here we were shouting into a difficult world that we can be together. We can bring holiness. This is holiness in the Holy Land, us being together. And together we were not alone. And I've come back and I feel less alone, even as these horrible, horrible things are taking place. Tonight, I went to a prayer vigil for the victims of these mass shootings, these mass murders. And I stood with those same clergy members, some of the same clergy members with whom I traveled in Israel. And I thought back to the Yad B'Yad schools. I said, we are not alone. We may feel alone, shouting into the tempest that we have to do better, that we have to work harder, that prayers are not enough, that thoughts are not enough, that it's time for good people to step forward and protect our children, and good people to step forward and fight racism and disarm those who would do harm to others. But at least standing there, we were not alone. And my friends, we are not alone. To come together for goodness, come together for holiness. It is our efforts that will make the land grow, right? If in God's mitzvot we walk. It's our choice to walk that way. And when we do, we will feel the fruit, the ripe sweetness of the fruit of the vineyards of goodness, ripening, and we'll eat of that fruit together and celebrate a world experiencing tikkun, experiencing healing. May it come speedily in our days, and may we work hard to make it so. Amen.